Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Geo and Joey Show. We have a special conversation today. And Joey, introduce our guests. How you doing today?
I'm doing better than I deserve. And so our guest is Hayden Laye, and I was scrolling through X as one does, and I came across an account that made me stop and go and look. It was Democrats for Life, and I went to their website, and I was like, this is very interesting. And so I reached out, and Hayden agreed to come on. So Hayden, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Hayden, let me tell you a little funny here. When Joey sent me the topic, right? Democrats for Life, I had a brain fart because I'm thinking, what are we going to talk about? Is this like, yo, I'm a Yankee for life or I'm a New Yorker for life? Like bragging about an identity, right? Like, but it's actually, then it hit me that we're talking about pro life, right? And so,
Yes, sir.
were you always pro life? And yeah, tell us a little bit about that background.
Yeah, I've pretty much always been pro life. It was, I'm from rural upstate South Carolina. It's a value that was always taught to me both in family and church and in the classroom too, in biology class.
Hmm.
That, life began at conception and that all human life is valuable. And it's an issue that's been uh, pretty much top of my heart, top of my mind for the past 4 or 5 years now, since about the 2020 election. I've been working in the pro life movement, working with Democrats for Life and other groups. Just I'm a non-conventional pro life individual, but at the end of the day, I am proudly pro life, boldly pro life. It's what I believe in 110%, and it's what I just believe that all human beings have the right to life, and that starts with the innocent preborn child in the womb.
Hmm. How do you reconcile that with the fact that you are a minority in your own party, right? Because obviously you're a Democrat. So yeah, how do you deal with that? Because I'm pretty sure you sometimes get cross-eyed from your own party.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not easy, but at the end of the day, it's what matters to me is what is right, and I am a Democrat. I agree with the Democratic Party on the majority of issues, but when it comes to the issue specifically of abortion, I have a very big, very fundamental difference of what the party believes should be the law on abortion, but that wasn't always the case.
Hmm.
Going back even 5, 10 years, we had 40 pro-life Democrats in Congress. I mean,
Hmm.
even when Obama was president, we had a vast array of Democrats who opposed abortion to some extent in Congress, which is why Roe v. Wade was never codified under Obama when he had supermajorities with his own party in Congress, because many of those Democrats weren't radical on the issue as we see today. Even just going back, we've lost Joe Manchin, and I mean, just even the few Democrats who would stand up and say we don't support taxpayer funding of abortion. But at the end of the day, we are a minority in the party, but it's what we believe in, and it's our values. I always like to say, I'm a Democrat because I'm pro life, and I'm pro life because I'm a Democrat. Those values go hand in hand. That we should believe in science, and that we should protect the vulnerable, and
Hmm.
they just go hand in hand for me. So, um, you know, I. I mean, I'm a minority in it, but it's what I believe is right and just, and that's what matters to me at the end of the day.
Okay, good.
So when you talk about it being part of your values, and first of all, I really appreciate you speaking out. One thing that I'm more on the Republican side, and one thing that sometimes I'll get from progressives who are pro-abortion is, well, you're just want to throw your religious view on or whatever. But what would you say is a good argument, right, that of our common values, right, as whatever, like where do you see a good grounding for this belief that can appeal to maybe a more center left or further left audience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not religious myself anymore. For that matter, I'm agnostic, but it's going right back to the science of it all. Democrats, when they talk about vaccines and climate change and everything else, whether or not you agree with all that,
Mm-hmm.
their argument
Trust the
is
science.
science.
Mm-hmm.
And the science on the abortion issue is abundantly more clear than the science on almost any other issue. The science is abundantly clear that 96% of biologists agree that new human life, and that goes for other animals too, of course, but that
Mm-hmm.
new life starts when a sperm fertilizes an egg at the moment of sperm egg fusion and creates a single celled zygote. That is the first stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk with people on the left, we should be the ones standing up for the vulnerable, standing up for those who don't have a voice, standing up for the rights of minorities and those with disabilities and those who just can't speak for themselves. That is a core principle and value of left wing individuals. But they just completely throw it all out the window when it comes to abortion in the name of so called women's rights. And it's not a women's rights issue. It's a human rights issue. And
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, every successful abortion is a human being killed. And
Mm-hmm.
I fundamentally disagree with anyone that would call killing a human being a right in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. A couple of questions ago, you said two things that I want to follow up on. You said that a couple of years ago, even in the Obama administration, there were many pro life Democrats, which is why Roe v. Wade wasn't codified even under Obama. And you used the word that some weren't radicalized. What in your mind has made this shift where this has become such an issue for the Democratic Party that they seem to make it the one and only issue?
The big thing is money. It's blood money
Mercy,
coming
ain't that
from
the truth?
Planned Parenthood and NARAL and Emily's List and these other groups that are just funneling all this money into these elected officials and saying, if you don't support abortion all the way until birth, taxpayer funded, we're going to get somebody else to run against you. And we've seen that happen. We're going to get somebody else to run against you. We're going to give them all the money. And unfortunately, in America, it really just follows the money. If you want that money to, and not your opponent. And
Mm-hmm.
we saw that with Bob Casey Jr., former now senator from Pennsylvania. His father, Governor Casey, back in the late '80s, early '90s in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania had the strictest abortion laws in America ever, pretty much, under his leadership as a Democrat. And his son, Bob Casey Jr., senator, started out as a pro-life Democrat too, and over time, the money, caught up with him, and he switched and he started voting pro-abortion. And thankfully, last year, Pennsylvania saw right through it, and they were able to vote him out of office and continue to have good pro-life representation in Dave McCormick. Because
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, this isn't. I'm a Democrat, but
Mm-hmm.
this isn't something I'm only going to stick with my party on. I will not vote for pro-abortion Democrats.
Hmm.
I've voted for Democrats. I voted for Republicans. Just being from where I am, I voted for more Republicans, honestly, just because most of our local offices are decided in Republican races, just being from where I'm from. But at the end of the day, I'm regardless of where I'm standing on aisles or party affiliation, at the end of the day, the number one thing is protecting life, protecting the preborn children, and helping mothers and families in America.
Okay, cool. I know you mentioned now that you're agnostic, but you grew up as a believer. I mean, you probably still remember the verse that said, the love of money is the root of all evil. And
Exactly.
so,
Yeah.
you get that money funneling in, and you see people compromising their morals even at the expense of children, and that is horrific. Joey said he met you on a website. What's the website about, and what is the purpose of that website?
I think Joey has a something he wanted to say, so I wanted to.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so well, my one of my questions that I had for you. So obviously, the pro-life movement has kind of become associated in the public imagination with the right, but I would hope at least that the pro-life organizations would have enough, like, because generally they're nonpartisan. Um, has Democrats for Life? Have you guys received like any support from like Right to Life or Live Action or any of these kind of national pro-life organizations?
Definitely, we work very well with our other pro life groups, and the pro life coalitions, both locally and in state levels, and on a national scale. We Democrats for Life just signed on to a coalition letter with National Right to Life and Susan B. Anthony's List, and a bunch of other national, state, and local pro life groups. About 150 of us calling on Congress to work to defund Planned Parenthood and defund the abortion industry. So we work, with our partners at the March for Life. We have pro-life Democrats speak at a lot of our pro-life marches because again, this isn't a partisan issue. When you look down at the state level, still today, we don't see it in DC much right now, but even on the state level, we still have a lot of pro-life Democrats running and getting elected. We have a very strong group up in Connecticut and another strong group up in Rhode Island. Um, have some amazing legislators down south in Louisiana and where I'm from back in South Carolina, and all the way out west, as well in New Mexico, and some of those states out there. So across the nation, even on the state level, a lot of these pro life laws have passed with bipartisan support, and a lot of these pro abortion laws have stood very strong opposition from Democrats, like I was mentioning in Connecticut. The when they were trying to pass some pro-abortion legislation up in Connecticut a couple of years ago, the strongest opposition to that piece of pro-abortion legislation was from uh, Black and Brown and Hispanic House Democrats in the Connecticut House, led by one of our pro-life Democrats, Trinae McGee.
Awesome. Gio,
No,
your
no, go
question.
ahead, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So another thing, another question I had, right? Practically, what do you think it would take to, say, elevate some of these legislators and whatnot around the country, elevate their profile? And I don't know. Again, I know Dan Lipinski. I remember him. He got primaried. I forget when. I think it was in the Trump years. But what would it take to get, say, a representative who supports life as a Democrat into the House or to some other national office?
Lots of grassroots support. That's the biggest thing. Lots of grassroots support. definitely just gonna, like I said, going back to it, it's a money problem. We're a nonprofit organization. We don't have the billions of dollars that Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry has to spend on all of these races. So, at the end of the day, anything like that is going to have to come from core grassroots support, and just a lot of support from both sides of the aisle, that everyone comes together and says, you know that we can all agree that defending the vulnerable is number one, and we need a bipartisan sect of people in our um, uh, chambers and our lawmaking chambers who say that they will stand up for life and stand up to just the sheer amount of abortion extremism that we see in America in this day and age. From just, I'm up here in DC because Planned Parenthood is currently suing my state of South Carolina because they want South Carolinians to fund Planned Parenthood through our tax dollars. They want, all this donation money, all this money from state and federal governments, and then they're turning around and funneling it into not their health centers, but back into those politicians who voted to give them money in the first place. And it's just a gigantic cycle of all this money and kickbacks. And that's the hardest thing. We are at the core, we are a grassroots movement who had its start with left wing activists. Going back to some of the first rescues at abortion clinics, some of the earliest leaders in the pro life movement were members of left wing parties and groups who still today, at the basic principles again of the pro-life movement, are standing up for the vulnerable, helping women and families across America, and is a primarily grassroots movement, which at its core to me is much more of at a heart, a left wing based movement than some of the other stuff that we would primarily see on the quote unquote right.
Okay, okay. I mean, it's what would you say is the biggest pushback from those in the Democratic Party about your stance? Because I'm pretty sure they're not going to say stuff like, hey, the money's going to stop flowing in. So what do they usually argue for?
I think this goes in outside of the party itself and just into America more in general. There is a huge lack of understanding of what abortion really is, what happens in an abortion, what an abortion, number one, does to the child and leaves the woman and her family feeling after that abortion. And that is going to take, a long time and a lot of education, and just one thing, I know I have a photo here somewhere, but just showing the images of
Mm-hmm.
babies who have been aborted and showing people the core reality. We have seen time and time again across history when genocides and massacres and wars are happening, that what has to happen is people have to know and see, keyword see, the truth and the reality. If not for seeing the images of slavery, we would have probably never abolished slavery in America. If we would have never seen the images of victims of lynchings like Emmett Till and other victims of racism in the 50s and 60s, we probably would have never ended segregation and made those practices illegal. If we would have never seen, one that very well stands out. If the Americans and the British and the Allies had never seen the images of what was truly going on in the Holocaust, they would have just it turned the tide of World War II when those photos started to get released. It the war in Ukraine, people were so focused on that at the beginning because the media constantly showed the images of what was going on in Ukraine and the images of the victims and of the bombings. And same, I'm whatever you believe on it, same thing happens in the Gaza Israeli conflict right now.
Hmm.
Seeing the images of the victims on both sides, it plays a very important impact, and that is something I fundamentally believe, and is not very common among major pro-life groups. But I fundamentally believe that for America to if we truly want to end abortion in America, that first has to start by showing Americans what abortion really is, what that reality is, what happens to a child in an abortion.
It's funny you mentioned that because I agree with you. On YouTube, you see a couple of people who go around New York City, Times Square, and they ask people questions about abortion, and then they're usually pro-abortion, and then he shows them a video on iPad, and a lot of them switch from being pro-abortion because there seems to be a collective ignorance of what abortion really is, and so a lot of people just think of it in theory, and when they see it, it begins to change the thought of the individual. Joey?
Yeah. First of all, I think that's all really good points. That you have to actually appeal to, like, people. I want to say people are fundamentally good. I think people fundamentally have goodness in them, but obviously, as a Christian, I believe we're fallen, and so we got to appeal to their better angels. Along that line, there's a story from what really kicked off the abolition movement in Great Britain. John Newton, he's the author of the song, the hymn Amazing Grace, but he had been a slave trader. That's how he made his money, and he made a lot of money. And one day, I'm probably going to not get the story completely right, but basically one day he had an epiphany, and he saw what was going on in his ship, and he just got sick to his stomach. And then later he wound up, and then shortly after he got some Christian literature and he ended up having a conversion. But basically he went on and he wrote a book detailing what he did and what the slave importation industry was like and what it was. And he published that book. And that book really became the impetus for the abolition movement that happened and really got it off the ground in Great Britain. And ultimately it was abolished. And then Britain committed itself to, ending the transatlantic slave trade. So it's definitely true that people, in order for people's consciences to be pricked, sometimes you got to have that hard conversation and actually show them the images. Mm-hmm. But on that note, you got to have grace too, because just like John Newton, this man who did some of the most vile things was able to become one of the catalysts for ending it. How many women who have had abortions and then come to regret it wind up becoming great leaders in the pro-life fight? So that's the nice balance, right? You recognize the evil, but you have grace. I think that's definitely key to our cause.
No, I definitely agree with that. Some of the fiercest people that I know fighting to end abortion today are people, women who are post-abortive. One of my really good friends, one of the first people that I ever really got to meet and to know in the pro-life spheres when I was just starting out. Her name is Serena, and she actually she's post-abortive, and she runs a ministry now today, a Christian ministry for other post-abortive women, and she's just an amazing leader. I love to brag on her. She,
Hmm.
and so many others like her too. Just really fighting the good fight, because they are the ones who have been harmed the most. They have been just absolutely lied to about what abortion was, that it was liberating and could solve their problems, but that's not what abortion is. And that they're some of the ones who taught me from very early on that the truth just has to be shown, and that these conversations have to happen, and it's going to take the work of so many people to just take a stand and say that they are pro-life and don't support child killing, and show their friends and their family the truth about what abortion is, and have those tough conversations, and just person by person work until we can start to change the hearts and souls of and minds of America.
Hmm. Hmm. How do you balance the notion that had a Democrat won the office, abortions would be ramping up, and yet obviously you're not a Republican, and yet Republicans have tampered down, the abortion industry. How do you reconcile that to yourself, emotionally? Because you're a
Yeah.
Democrat for life, and that's fine. But how do you balance that?
Well, like I said, this issue is my number one. It's the issue that's been near and dear to my heart for the majority of the past 4 to 5 years. And there are definitely other things, and it does lead to some great conflicts, because Donald Trump, I disagree with him on a lot, but at the end of the day, he is, I think, a million times better than the alternative would have been on the abortion issue. He released my friends from prison, and I think we're starting to see some leaders start to stand up, and hopefully we can start to see money to Planned Parenthood and some of these other abortion groups start to be cut. Um, so I'm very thankful for him for doing that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the other issues that I disagree with him on, I'm still going to definitely criticize him where I feel that, and that goes to my friends in the South Carolina
Hmm.
legislature too. When you
Hmm.
know I'll call my state representative. I'm just like, very thank you for passing the pro life legislation that we had this session. Now, can you please go and oppose this, and this, because this is just ridiculous. But um, I actually got to meet Kamala Harris back a couple of years ago, and she just, I think, for a lot of people in the
You're still there.
oh sorry, um, but I think their hearts are truly in good places. And I think it just goes back to the money thing,
Hmm.
where if they don't say this, they're not going to get the funds, and they're not going, excuse me, to get elected.
Hmm.
Um, but when it came down to Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, I actually ended up voting for one of my friends who ran for a third party,
Hmm.
but also South Carolina. Just the way that the electoral college works, South Carolina was
Hmm.
definitely favored to go to Donald Trump. So
Hmm.
um, I ended up voting for my friend who ran third party, primarily
Hmm.
just an anti-abortion campaign. But at the end of the day, whoever's in office, I'm gonna my values are still going to remain the same, of course, and I'm going to criticize them where I see fit, and thank them where thanks is necessary, and that goes for whoever is the president of the United States, all the way down to my state representative, and my friends in the South Carolina legislature. Just the values remain the same regardless of who's in office, and the fight stays the same.
Go ahead, Joey.
So one thing, and this actually ties into a conversation we had last week, but there's this guy Jeff Mayhew. He's with Uncap the House, and one of the points he's made, his big thing. He talks about we need representation matters, right? That's kind of what the Revolutionary War was fought over, right? No taxation without representation. And one thing he talks about is if we repeal the Reapportionment Act of 1929, right, and expand the number of people in the House, right, more diverse ideological voices would have the opportunity to get elected. Um, I guess when I think of this idea of having a faction of the Democratic Party that has power, do you think like some kind of structural reform like that could help you guys get more of your people into office? That yes, maybe there's going to be some things that those legislators would be for that I don't agree with as more conservative leaning, but I'm just saying from my perspective, I would love for a race between two pro-life candidates. I think that would be so good for the country, right? Like we can debate the other issues, we can, go after, have our opinions and our views, but I don't know. Do you think it will structural reform for those voices to be able to get into office again?
Definitely no. I mean, I completely agree with that. We need even people who are running against each other on two different political tickets, two different political parties, doesn't inherently mean that you have to disagree on every issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's something, I truly believe, just as a core principle of myself personally, that we need to, even as a Democrat, I agree. There are more oftentimes than not where, regardless of what party you belong to, we can come to an agreement on the majority of issues. But there's just so much partisanship, and that, especially at a federal level, just so much partisanship, so much party divide, that people think that you have to be Republican, you have to be Democrat. If I'm a Democrat, I have to be pro-abortion. If I'm Republican, I have to be, this, that, and the other. And that's just not what America was founded on. And I definitely support the Uncap the House movement. I think that's great. Where I am in the upper part of my congressional district, has very has very different needs than what's going on down in the southern part of my district, and we're a small district already when it's compared to others. So definitely getting local representation back, and I think that would help a lot of these problems too. Is just once you get down to the more local level, you really do start to see a breakdown of the partisan divide. And that, like I said, we do have more pro-life Democrats at the local level. But once you start to chip away at that, and you just make everything about parties, that all goes straight out the window.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What because on your website, obviously you guys talk, obviously the main thing is abortion, but you guys see, right, with you guys' values, that you see it extends, the pro-life principle extends to other things. So could you give us some idea of some of the ways in which for pro-life Democrats the life issue expands?
Definitely. I mean, the biggest thing that we believe in, as related to that, is something called the consistent life ethic, and that is opposition to, number one, abortion, but also includes opposition to the death penalty and euthanasia / suicide, war, and some of these other things. So we are an anti-death penalty organization at our core too. In addition, we support climate, action on climate change. We support racial justice, and we support healthcare for all human beings. And when we say healthcare for all, that means healthcare for all, from preborn children to those in hospice care, and those who are taking their final breaths. We believe that all human beings have the right to live a full natural life, that every human being has the right to, number one, be born, but to also have the support after birth and to die a natural death.
Very
You
good.
know,
And that I'm glad you talked about the euthanasia piece, because I feel like that's the next tiger that's going to become heavily culturally pushed. I think it's already starting. So and there's not a lot of people really talking about it in the mainstream, but I think that's definitely where things are headed. So I'm glad to see that you guys are on that. And personally, I've become more skeptical. Well, I'm not fundamentally against the death penalty. I've become more skeptical of it in practice. Mainly for me, the selling point is when I've looked into some certain criminal justice stats and just the number of innocent people that often get caught up. It's like, or that even confess to a crime for various reasons. It's like, while I may not be in principle against it if it's justified, if there's any chance that we're going to be killing an innocent person, I'm going to side with John Adams, who said it's better that innocence be protected than that guilt be punished. So I can get some overlap with you on that as well.
mm-hmm. you know, in this past election, there seemed to, quote unquote, right? They say Trump and the Republican Party got a mandate from America, right, to push it in the direction they wanted to go. As a Democrat for life, and yourself being a Democrat, many people have said that the party has gone too far left. How do you bring the party back, in your estimation?
I don't. I fundamentally disagree that the party has gone too far left, and it definitely just depends on the issue. I think it's just more, you know, over time, people are going to say that about anything. I mean, if you ask anybody, I mean, on the left, you're going to hear that the right has gone too far right. If you ask anybody on the right, they're going to say that the left has gone too far left. That's just going back to the same partisan divide, and that you can go back decades and hear the same thing. When um, Republicans were fighting to end slavery, well, they've gone too far, said, a lot of the Democrats at the time. So I fundamentally disagree with that. That's just always going to keep changing. You're
Mm-hmm.
never not going to hear that, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
But, I do feel like, if you want to look at specific issues, you can definitely take a look at that and bring it back to abortion. The party has definitely gone, just completely off the rails from even what the American public believe. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking to most people and you talk to them, well, some people will say, well, let's put it somewhere around when heartbeat starts at about 6 weeks to on the farther end would be when viability is at about 20 weeks. Somewhere in that range is the pretty big consistent is the when most Americans believe that abortion should be restricted, somewhere along those lines, just depending on who you ask. And yet, what most in the party stand for today is all the way until birth, and they want it to be funded by tax dollars. They
Mm-hmm.
want it, completely funded by tax dollars. They personally, I believe as a Democrat, there's some other things that we should probably be funding first with our tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't have health care for all. We still, have so much to do as far as uh, combating climate change and all these other things. So, even if you are very pro, like, taxes, and want to, collect more taxes and spend it, and everything else. There's just so much more that we could probably be much better things that we could probably be spending our tax dollars on. But they've definitely gone far away from what even we saw under Bill Clinton back in the 90s. Just
Hmm.
safe, legal, rare. I mean, that was the far left abortion position at that point. If you
Hmm.
ask somebody today, do you support, let's say, legal rare, and they say yes to that, they're considered, a moderate to, even somewhat right wing when it comes to abortion, compared
Hmm.
to modern day Democrats.
You mentioned just now in this answer that some are even willing to go up to birth, right, to commit an abortion. Yet there were times during the election that was denied, either by candidates or on the news saying that doesn't happen. What makes you feel comfortable that you can say that? I mean, I believe it to be true, but many in your party would deny that, or at least in sound bites.
You can simply look at, at their votes. I mean, at the end of the day, they can say whatever they would like to, but you can look at their votes. And when these bills have been brought up, in Minnesota, they just voted to do away with their Born Alive Infant Protection Act. On a federal level, we bring this law up every time we have Republicans in control of the House or of the Senate, and Democrats on both sides. There was only one Democrat, Henry Cuellar of Texas, in the entire Congress who voted for the Infant Protection Act to vote to protect infants who were born alive after surviving an abortion.
Mm.
And the Democrats' defense is, well, this doesn't happen. Well, if it doesn't happen, then you shouldn't have any problem voting for it.
Yeah.
But they can say all they want, but it doesn't take a lot to find their true voting record on the issue.
Mhm. Obviously, go ahead, Joey.
I was just going to say, so one thing I would say, so obviously as a Republican, right, it's easy for me to criticize Democrats, but to be honest, I see the slide happening within my own party, right?
Hmm.
In the election cycle after the primaries ended, the JD and Donald made a very deliberate choice of sliding to the left on abortion, right? Like, well, like even going so far as to saying that maybe there should be some kind of funding or whatever. Or so, like, there's people, I could think of many Congress people on the right who now are talking in that safe, legal, and rare way, or, and so it's like, there's kind of a meme that at least from the right side of the aisle, that uh, the '90s Democrats are today's Republicans, and so it's like, if that trend continues, we very well could have two pro-abortion parties in this country. And I don't think that'll happen. And I think in order for that not to happen, right, pro-lifers, regardless of party, need to insist ourselves. I think of for one of my classes, I had to read Madison's Federalist Papers. And in Federalist 10, one of the things that he emphasizes is how the problem of faction is solved in our political system by more determined factions speaking, right, engaging in the political process, right, being a part of it. And so again, that's why I love seeing what Democrats for Life are doing. That's what I love, all the pro-life organizations. I just think unless we actively resist the slide, the Republicans could just as easily become a pro-abortion party.
How would you say if somebody wanted to get involved, right? Perhaps this is the first time a Democrat is hearing, oh, wow, there's a faction that's pro life. How would you advise them to get involved? And how can they contact you on your website?
Yeah, definitely. Our website is democratsforlife.org. And you can send us an email, and that will go directly to me, and I can get you connected with your, if we have a chapter in your state, we can get you connected with your state chapter leader. And if there's not a chapter in your state, we can definitely work to get one up and running. I run the chapter for North and South Carolina, and we have chapters in a majority of states. Working on our western states is my next little bit, but we have chapters from here in South Carolina all the way up to Seattle and Washington, and most places in between. So definitely would love to work with anybody who is considers themselves left wing and just wants to help us work to chip away at the pro-abortion extremism that we're seeing within today's Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm. One last question from me as we begin to wrap up. I'll let Joey have the last question. With the Trump administration, it went from federal to states' rights, right? And they're pushing more state rights. What would you like to see if you were the governor of South Carolina? What would you like to see, and what do you think? No, not what you would like to see, because I know what you would like to see, but what do you think realistically you can achieve within the next, let's say, 5 years?
Every state is definitely going to look different, as we've overturned Roe v. Wade, and this decision is primarily, Congress can still definitely make laws, but, the reality is that, this is, primarily left up to the states at this point. But, in South Carolina, what we're working on right now is just to get abortion ended in South Carolina, completely end it. We have legislation to do that. And unfortunately, that legislation has been held up by some of the officials at the top of the Republican Party in the South Carolina House, even though we have 40 co-sponsors, including a Democrat on the legislation. But that's what we're continuing to work for. That's what we've been working for. That's what we will work for until it gets done, just to and that's, I've committed to work, as hard as I can to see abortion ended in my state. I love South Carolina. It's where I was born. It's where I've lived all my life. It is my loyalties are 1,000,000% to the Palmetto State. It's the best place I could ever imagine, and I will work night and day until we can end abortion in South Carolina, and then start to work with some of our other states up in North Carolina and down in Georgia to get the same results down there.
Okay. All right, Joey, wrap us up with a question or two.
So I do have another question for you, but I wanted to respond to actually something Gio said. For anybody like this on this issue of states' rights. Now, listen, I'm a federalism guy. I call myself a casual federalism enjoyer. I think it's good, and I think for many issues, and I would even say for most issues, the states having a more robust role, I think, is good. But I would push everyone to reread the Lincoln-Douglas debates and understand the principles that were at stake then. Because I think when it comes to this issue, it's really, really important how we compromise, right? Because as statesmen, as people, we live in a democracy. We're going to have to compromise. But there's a difference between a compromise that gives away a principle and a compromise that recognizes current reality, right? One of the things that sometimes, and I totally oppose this group, like the neo-Confederates or whatever, the portrayers of the lost cause narrative, one of the things they'll often say is, well, the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Well, where they're wrong is, while the Civil War wasn't explicitly about abolition, it was very much about slavery. Because while Lincoln said, very explicitly, it's like he would be open to compromises with the slave power that preserved the Union, if they preserved the Union on the basis of, we are the nation of the Declaration, right? We're a nation that, yes, we have slavery, but we recognize it as a necessary evil. But what was happening in the lead up to the Civil War is that old argument from the founding that slavery was a necessary evil had turned into, and among many politicians, to argue for slavery as a positive good, and that the idea of popular sovereignty, right? That was Douglas's, because Douglas, while personally was probably anti-slavery, his big thing was popular sovereignty, right? The idea that, listen, if slavery spreads to the new territories or not, it should just be up to the people of those territories. And what Lincoln saw there is, even though he was willing to compromise to save the Union for the power to stay where it was, he knew that if it expanded, that means, I mean, it's the basic principle of markets, right? If you have more area where something can happen, you're going to have more need for it. And he knew that would empower the slave power. And so he wasn't willing to do that because he knew that would put the nation on a track where abortion could not be gotten rid of, right? Slavery couldn't be gotten rid of because the principle that would have been established is popular sovereignty, right? The people can, either way on the morality of it, the people can vote. And he just wasn't willing to do that. And so slavery was what the war is about. And the reason I go into that monologue is because I think right, whether we're Democrats for life, Republicans for life, independents for life, yes, we're going to have to make some there may be a time where we may have to have a bill that maybe allows more abortions than we would like, but moves the needle in a pro-life direction. And like, personally, I feel kind of dirty about even those bills because I just think abortion is so abhorrent. I want it abolished. But we've got to be recognized that if we're compromising in a way that doesn't give away the principle. But as we close out, I guess, trying to think, what would you say is the most pressing next step to nationalizing and to making a part of the regular discourse on the left, Democrats for life and this kind of advocacy?
No, I think like I said a couple of questions ago, the biggest thing is just grassroots people, grassroots support, standing up and making your voice heard, getting involved with your local groups and letting them know that, you are here, you are a Democrat, but you stand for life, and just getting involved with us. And, we are the voice of pro-life Democrats and those who are on the left and opposed to abortion extremism in our party. And, it's just going to take a lot of us just standing up and making our voices heard and letting them know that they can't ignore our voices, because if they continue to ignore our voices, they will continue to lose and fall deeper and deeper into this hole.
All right. There you heard it. Hey, Hayden, give the people the website again where they can reach out to you. And then when we sign off, the screen will go dark a little. Just hang out for a second. So where can they find you? Yeah.
DemocratsForLife.org, and my email is Hayden, HAYDEN .Laye, LAYE, at demsforlife.org. So just feel free to send me an email or feel free to reach out via our website.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing this perspective. Until next time on the Gio and Joey Show, be blessed.